Welcome to this episode of How We Made That App. I'm your host, Madhukar Kumar. I started off my career as a developer and then eventually moved to product management and then finally marketing. In today's episode, we have with us the co-founder and creator of FlowiseAI, Henry Heng. Flowise is a no-code application development platform that allows you to build generative AI applications. Welcome to the show, Henry. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea of Flowise and what made you go and build it out and then just open source it. I believe it was last year, soon after OpenAI had come out with ChatGPT. And of course, we had LangChain also come out similar around that time as well.
I think the idea of Flowise came from the previous job that I had. I was a software engineer in a company called Fidelity Investment, finance brokerage firm. And within that company, we have a group which is called AI group. So this is for like people who have interest in AI, wanted to try different, technologies and see how we can create something within, our teams to use it. So I think someday I was just scrolling through the forums and I saw somebody share about LangChain, also Llama Index, and I got intrigued. So I started playing around with it. And at the same time, I wanted to create some kind of like knowledge-based chatbot because as a software engineer, our documentations is all over the place. Like we have in Jira, we have in Confluence, and all of the communications happens on the teams as well, right? So I wanted to create a chatbot that can allow kind of like newcomers that is onboarded to our team to be able to ask questions about how to set up a repository, how to get access to that particular key, how to put in a support ticket. Now, I was the one who has to guide the newcomers every time, and kind of I got tired of keep answering the same questions. So I wanted to create something like this, and started to use LangChain, started to use ChatGPT, and and then I had this idea of creating this kind of local tools because I see a lot of demands from the other team as well, and some of these teams they don't necessarily have the AI knowledge. So I wanted to create these tools that allow not just my team, but also the other teams to be able to use the same tool to create the same applications.
This was very close to after GPT 3.5. And at that time, did you then leave your job to then just go full-time and do your Flowise?
Yeah. No, I was still on my full-time job that time because I didn't plan to launch a company or, even become a startup. I was just trying to create something for, our internet teams. And I just happened to be, the other teams love the product. And I decided to open source it. So, initially I just put it up there to see any developers have kind of same interests or same needs as me. So didn't think of that far. I just put it up there. And the next morning that I woke up, there's like few hundred or few thousand of GitHub stars and kind of blew up on the Twitter as well. So I did not expect that one. And I think we just put something on the Twitter, and Harrison from LangChain reached out to us about doing a webinar series together. I think after the webinar series, we kind of snowball and it become larger and larger. More people notice it, more people using it, and eventually after I think 2-3 months after we launched Flowise, we think it is the right time to go all in because we see there's a lot of potential in it. And a lot of the developers are liking it. Like we have achieved some kind of a developer mindshare. People loving it, people using it, and wanted to grow it as big as possible.
Yeah, in fact, I've been using it as well. And what I've done, I've been watching these YouTube videos from somebody named Leon, who seems to be very prolific in building Flowise AI videos.
Exactly.
Do you know him?
Personally, I don't know him, but we have been chatting, all over emails and Discord as well. It is here's the great thing about open source, right? You have the best community ever, that generate, tutorials, courses, contents, because they love the product. And throughout, all this, community, we get to know them better and we get to work with them. Like right now, I've been, talking to Leon almost kind of on a weekly basis because we are kind of brainstorming what kind of videos that we want to generate for the next one and, what's the next step.
That's phenomenal. I was going to say that based on some of those videos, I set up my own instance and then deploy it on render. So after every time there is a new PR merge, I just, update my
Yeah,
branch and it just gets updated. So
exactly.
tell us a little bit about, some of the use cases that you see most often. Like, how do you
Uh-huh.
think people have started to use it? Of course, one of the things that is most common is what you said earlier, like a support chatbot where people want
Yeah,
to just create a chatbot against their own knowledge base. But what are
yeah.
some of the new and interesting use cases that you've started to see as well?
We have worked with AWS. We have done a webinar series, or again, like with single store as well. And some of the interesting use cases that they were using is that they were generating product descriptions for the items that they have. So by using a vision model, they upload an image and automatically generate the description of that particular image. That is one of the interesting. So like, let's say they upload thousands of images and within a few minutes, you have all the product descriptions, written for you. And that is part of it. I think the other one is that they've been using it to summarize the user's review. I think that's kind of interesting as well. Like given that one particular item, you have like 100 of items, 100 of reviews, then they use Flowwise to generate a summary of all the users' review. So I think that's another interesting use cases. Also, we have been working with different enterprises that are working with structured data. So SQL, SQL databases. For example, we have been working with a company called Hitachi, and they were using single store as their SQL databases, and they wanted to create a chatbot that allowed the field operators to ask questions about the IoT sensors that they have in SQL databases. For example, one of these sensors have an on and off state, and what was the last time that it was used by somebody else or some other operators. They wanted to offer this kind of a natural language chatbot that allows the field operators to ask in a human interaction way. So I think there's a lot of interesting use cases, not just necessarily the chat, but also classifications, extractions, tagging as well.
So that's very interesting about the structured query that you just talked about, because that's been on top of my mind as well.
Uh-huh.
When the whole retrieval augmented generation or RAG became a thing, people were just hurting towards, vector only databases.
Yeah,
And that's primarily for, unstructured data, because that's why you
yeah,
use semantic search. But
exactly.
do you see a lot more unstructured data information in synthesis, or do you also see more structured as well? And the second question I have was, do you see a lot of individual developers using Flowwise, or do you, just like Hitachi, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other giant enterprise companies that are also using Flowwise now?
So the first questions, I think in future, there will be a lot more mixed data, combination of structure and unstructured. And actually, to that point, we have been trying to create or working with these enterprises because they wanted to not just create a chatbot that can answer questions about structured data, but also from unstructured data. So let's say they
Mhm.
have the SQL databases, which records all of the machines that are on and off. But also they wanted to use a rack to ask questions about the manuals of the machines. So you can see it is a combination of structured data and unstructured data,
Yep.
right? So I think, in the future, there'll be a lot more cases like this. So it'll be a mixture of both. And it depends on how you want to solve it. Like in terms of Flowwise, lots of the users are creating an agent and basically creating different tools, and each tool is kind of like pulling information from different sources. So that's how they achieve, this functionality when it comes to unstructured and structured data.
Hey, that's one thing that I see quite a lot too, where people, just like the use case you mentioned, people want to do a SQL query to get the structured, and in that same single shot, also do like a dot product and get back a
Yeah,
semantic search result. And maybe at that point, you might also want to do a exact keyword. So you
yeah,
get
hybrid.
the whole thing in one shot versus a few shots.
Yeah, like I believe single store also provide this kind of hybrid search as well. Semantic search
Yep.
plus the keyword search as well. Yeah, we have been seeing a lot of people using it as well. So it's a combination of all, and it also depends on how clean your data is coming in. Like some of the users are using, there's one application called Unstructured, which will be able to filter out, those tables, extract the images from a PDF so that you have a cleaner data that is going into your vector databases. And that's how you can guarantee you have a better output, on your end as well.
To then go back to the previous question, do you see a lot more individual developers using Flowwise, or do you see a lot more enterprise, or is it more 50-50?
I think a graph would be much more suitable to describe this. So like, here's the graph, right? Slowing upwards. So I think at the very initial phase, we have a lot of indie developers that are coming from smaller companies, or like AI consultancy businesses. They want to build AI chatbot for their clients. So a lot of these users come at the initial phase. And right now, I think we are situated at the middle phase where, enterprises started to come in as well. Like I think this is the same journey as a lot of the open source company. Initially, you have all these users and slowly you build up your reputations, and enterprises started to see, this project is valid. People are using it. So they started to come in and they started to use it. I think we're at that point where we see a lot of enterprises have been started to use Flowwise, wanted to take Flowwise into productions. But again, there's still a long journey ahead.
Yeah, and one of the new features that you added was the integration with Langsmith. I love that because you can also see in real time what are the responses coming back from your RAG pipeline as well. In general, do you have visibility, or do you have an opinion or anecdotes about, do more people use commercial LLMs like OpenAI, or are they leaning more towards the open source large language models, which keeps getting better and better in the last few weeks?
Yeah, we personally don't track what's the percentage there, but judging from, the interaction that I have with the community, I would say 80% of them are kind of using OpenAI, and open source is definitely catching up, but it's still lagging behind OpenAI. But I do see the trend that is starting to pick up, like especially you have the Mixtral, you have Llama 2 as well. But the problem is that I think the cost is still the major factor. Like people tend to go to which large language models, which has the lowest cost, right? So depending on which models, like some Mistral model is definitely costing cheaper than OpenAI. So we start to see that shift as well.
Next question I had was just how do you personally use Flowwise? Like, you started Flowwise because you had a pain point. Like, how do you use it today yourself as an indie developer?
After a few weeks that I created Flowwise, I was in the middle of purchasing a property here in Ireland. And, when purchasing property, you have a lot of documentations that, legal documentations, you have you need to ask somebody to come check the houses and, validate everything is working fine. So there's a lot of reports to read. So I use Flowwise to create a basic RAG flow and ask question about it. So I think that's the first time that I, use the product. And when I use it, I really mean I use it. So like I can search for what are the condition of the roof and what are the condition of the floor? Is there any hidden stuff that is like, hidden in some part of the report, buried in the report? That's when I used Flowwise initially, but over the time, I think I've used it mostly for, again, RAG application as well. And we have been creating a chatbot which allow users to ask questions about, Flowwise components or Flowwise documentation. Lots of people that come to Flowwise, usually they are from low-code and no-code community. So in some point, they needed help and guidance in how to set up different flows, how to achieve different things. And due to the limited resources, so we cannot be there 24/7 to support these users, right? So we have created, a basic chatbot which is kind of similar to LangChain. I think LangChain did something as well, chat LangChain. So we also created something similar that allow users to ask questions about Flowwise.
So this is very interesting because, we also see a lot of customers just using internal data to build a simple RAG pipeline and then chat with the data. But one thing that comes up with a lot of these large enterprises and companies is, hey, I don't want to send my, the output from LLM or output from my RAG pipeline to the LLM. I want to keep it private. And I also want to make sure that the right people are accessing the data. Do you see that? And what are some recommendations or the best practices that you have seen people use to just keep the data private and also maintain the right data level access?
Yeah, I think two things. So we definitely seen that request a lot. So first thing is the provisions. So you need to, especially for enterprise use cases, you need to provision your different access to, whoever that is using Flowwise. So let's say you are enterprises, you spin up an Flowwise instance that allows your people to use it, but you don't want people to access, let's say, GPT-4, right? Because that is costly. And so what we offer is that you can actually create a JSON schema similar to like a YAML folder, a YAML file, and you can specify which model is accessible, which vector database is accessible, these different things. So provision is the first thing. And the second thing is when talk about, these enterprises don't want the data to, get leaked, to OpenAI in some cases. So I think most of the time they go with Azure OpenAI, which is much more enterprise ready, and they go with AWS Bedrock, because they are familiar with Azure, they are familiar with AWS. So they have been using these two mostly for enterprise LLMs. But also some cases they were, like some of these enterprises, they have enough resources to have their own A100 GPU. So they spin up their own instances. They also run their own open source models using Ollama. So we do provide Ollama integration in Flowwise. You just basically need to spin up your own GPU instance that is running Ollama, the models, let's say Llama 2, Mistral, or whatever. Then you connect the connection string to Flowwise.
In terms of, the vision and future of Flowwise, couple of questions. One, I know that you are part of the Y Combinator now, but what's your vision about monetizing Flowwise as a company or as a commercial product? And two, what's your vision for this product going forward, in a few months, maybe a year out?
Yeah. So for the first one, the monetization strategy, similar to a lot of the open source project, we will be releasing our cloud hosted version very soon. So which means people don't have to, deploy their own instance, but instead they can use the cloud hosted version. So that will come to different pricing, similar to Langsmith. Yeah, LangChain also released a hosted version of Langsmith some time ago, a few weeks ago. Yeah. So you have different pricing, and that is part of the monetization plan.
When do you plan to launch that? Sometime this year?
Yep, sometime this year. Estimating the April, sometimes end of April or beginning of May. And the other monetization part is that we also offer enterprise SLA plan with our enterprise client, where we provide primary supports and different features like SSO sign-in, our back control, the rollback access control, and different enterprise features as well.
Now, going back to the database or the data platform, let's back up a little bit. So you worked as a software engineer in a very large organization, right? And several organizations. Yeah. How do you typically see the data stack evolving? Because I know when I started off, it used to be one database, and then it became big, and then you shard it and so on. But tell us a little bit more of your experience. One, how has that evolved, and how is the team structure typically architected in order to keep up with the changing data platform and the needs for the application?
I think similar to a lot of the developers. So first off, you will see a single databases that is handling everything. But over the time, you start to see more databases, whether it's from auto-scaling groups, whether it's from sharded databases. But when I first joined Fidelity, I was kind of puzzled because of the complex architecture they have. I think they have quite a complex one. They have different databases in, of course, in different VPC, different regions, and each serving different customer as well. Like, for example, some of the confidential informations are stored, in a separate databases, and some of these kind of like the metadata, users information, which are more generic informations, are stored in another databases. So you have a lot of different databases that are dedicated to store different things. And you have different schema as well. So it is quite complicated when I first joined, but over the time, you started to see everything comes into, plays into one shape, and you start to see, oh, this is the reason of doing so, this is another doing so. So that's kind of my experience of as a software engineer. Growing over the time, you started to see, oh, why do we have to use these databases? Why do we have to shard it? And why do we have to, auto scale it, etc.
So as a developer working for large organizations, like how are the choices made these days in terms of what database to use? Like when you're building something, do you typically just go with an open source database and then you figure out how to deploy it in production, or is it typically somebody else making a decision? What does that process look like?
I think from bigger organizations, what I've experienced that first you go through the architect. So the architect of companies and the senior teams as well will, kind of decide what architecture that we want to go with. And usually I was part of the conversation as well. Like we tend to decide between, NoSQL or SQL depending on the use cases that we are using. For schema that are like fast changing schema or inconsistent, not like tabular structured data, we often use NoSQL, MongoDB. And for structured data, we use MySQL from my previous company. And yeah, so that's how we kind of like decide based on the use cases. And also you have the, decide between the consistency, and you want to decide between the latency of the, different databases as well. I think, yeah, the process is like you go through the architecture, and then you start to see which use cases make sense, and you start to use, that databases.
And coming back to generative AI and vectors and vector-only databases, what's your take on where is that world headed? Like, do you feel there's going to be another category just for vector-only? Who will use it? And in general for RAG, what are some of your hot takes or predictions on where do you think it will be headed?
I think right now we have definitely seen a lot of large language models, which has much more context window than, the initial GPT 3.5, which has like, 4,000 something. So right now we see like 1 million something, Claude, Gemini. And at some point, I believe you have seen it as well, like people were like, even questioning if vector databases really needed, given that kind of a context size for large language models. But from my personal opinion, I think RAG will still be relevant, going forward, because if you were to do like, there's this task called, needle in a haystack, where people, carry out evaluations to test if the models is really good at picking, that needle in the whole haystack environment. Some models perform good, some model does not, right? So at some point, we still need RAG to, first is to, because RAG is a cheaper alternative to do that. And second, it has much more precision to do that. Like if you really, really wanted to get down to that particular point, get down to that particular details, RAG probably is still the best options to go for, both in terms of the cost and the accuracy as well. As we all know, large language models tends to hallucinate. So yeah, that's part of the issue.
And even for large context models, just like you said, it's more expensive because if you send 1 million tokens to the large language model, that's a lot of tokens that you pay for, and it takes longer for it to process as well, versus you just take out just the specific parts that needed and send it over a period of time. And, this is, of course, something that we see as well. Now, in terms of analytics and in terms of what we call a live RAG or real-time RAG, do you see that as some of the use cases? And what I mean by that is, let's say there's streaming data, like a video stream like this, which you want to either vectorize some of it or, keep up some of that as some sort of a pre-computed analytics so that you can do something with it later on. Do you see that as a need? Like, otherwise, typically what happens is in a vector-only database, you're only vectorizing data or creating embeddings as a batch mode. And do you see a need for more and more people to start using live vectorization of real-time data?
Definitely. I think like a lot of use cases depend on the real-time data, right? Like some of these, I think it all depends. Like, for example, I was talking to one of my friend the other day. He was in this finance department, and his job was to analyze the transactions of, let's say, the Amex and detect if this particular transaction is fraudulent or not. So this kind of data usually comes in real time, and you have to use a real-time solutions for these kind of use cases. But for different use cases, like maybe it was just doing a RAG on a PDF documents, a static data, it might not be relevant. But again, I would say it is depending on the use cases that you were using. Some of these use cases really needed real-time streaming, real-time data. And for that, you will have to use the real-time vectorizing.
In terms of enterprise and production readiness, are you also looking to add some sort of evaluation of RAG pipelines within Flowwise as well, or does that already exist in some form?
That is already in some form. So we have some POC already there, estimating to release around next to release. So yes, we do have our own evaluations frameworks that is coming out, and it plays nice together with all the chat flows that they create on Fowise. So you can actually compare different metrics by putting a data set, and then you can call these different chat flows and compare the precisions, the recall, and different metrics as well. So yeah, we are working on that.
Switching gears a little bit, I know I would love to hear what is your advice for somebody who's getting into generative AI or building applications for new. What would be your advice be? And also keep in mind that yesterday we heard about Devin, the software engineer.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
The Devin, yeah, I think that kind of, we will have to find another way to make a living then. We'll probably all lose his job. But yeah, I think Devin is really interesting. It has access to browsers, to command terminals, to the IDE as well. For me, I think Devin is something that can elevate or assist us as a software engineer to do a better job. So right now, a lot of our tasks are like repetitive tasks and some tasks that are, you know how to do it, but you're just lazy to do it because you have to like type out the code and things like that. So it can help us, for that part of task. But in terms of a more complex, let's say if you were to create some kind of algorithms that you want. So for example, the chat flow in Flowwise actually use how do we come up with the algorithms to go from the the starting nodes to the end nodes, and what about if you have if else different logics. So we have to come up with algorithms that use breadth search, depth search to traverse through the graph and find the first node and the end node, and how do we traverse to different logic to different routes. So for this kind of a more complex algorithmic task, maybe Devin can help us to come up with a bare bone of the code, give it some inspiration, and from there, human can like take it to the next level to become a finished product. So I think product like Devin, Copilot will really help a lot. In fact, I've been using Copilot a lot of times. It does really help us, to produce code in a much faster way, because it produces all this kind of a bare bone code, and then human can just take over and then finish it through the end line. become a finished real product.
Personally, I feel the next chat GPT moment would be when, OpenAI or somebody releases a feature where the LLM can access the browser and a keyboard and a mouse, so they can go on our behalf and, access all of that. What's your take on it? Like, what do you think is going to be the next chat GPT moment?
So for that, I think some of the companies have started to do that, right? I mean, not officially from ChatGPT, but I've seen some companies have started to create something like this. And I see it very useful because in software engineering world, you often need to write end-to-end tests to do that, right? Cypress tests or whatever to, click this, click that, and test this, test that. So we have seen a few companies, actually we have been exploring as well. They are using large language models and also combination of vision to, instruct the models, instruct the mouse to click here, test this, and do that and test that. So I think it will help a lot for the end-to-end testing because I hate writing the end-to-end test. But again, I see like the next ChatGPT moment, definitely Devin did give me some of those kind of a vibe. It has become like the real software engineer because there's I'm not sure if you came across this video from Jensen and Vida. He was talking about people don't have to know coding anymore. The next generation of coding or the next programming language is called English. So everybody can become a programmer. Like maybe when we really come to that, that's the next ChatGPT moment, spark again.
I agree, but I also feel like for example, if you look at Mid-Journey, I also think that the people who are doing the most creative stuff are people who are photographers or cinematographer because they know what to ask. They know, use this lighting or go use this lens and this camera and this color scheme versus somebody who just goes in, knows nothing about photography. Sure, you do a good enough job, but not at the same level as somebody who has really understood all the concepts of photography. So I feel like maybe that's where software engineering is headed, where, you can build out a Hello World or even a standard application, but, what about if you really want to put it enterprise grade? And maybe we'll get there. In terms of, just a few quick questions before we wrap up, what's your favorite AI app?
Am I allowed to say Flowwise? Probably not. But I
Other
would
than
say
Flowwise.
okay. So our internet backlogs for Flowwise, we're using Notion for that. I think Notion a few months ago they came up with a Notion AI, right? So that allows you to chat with your backlog, your all documentation on your Notions. Like we have been a big users of Notion. I think that is my favorite AI tool for now because we don't have to go through all the different tickets and go through all the different backlogs and to search for what we need. We just ask on the Notion and see. Like here's the best part because I think the AI tool that is embedded in the software, in the daily software application that you use is the best thing because like it really elevates your productivity, your efficiencies, and it is it's just these kind of little things that really matters and that really you see the impact of the AI. Yeah.
What's your favorite IDE?
I would say my favorite IDE is still Visual Studio Code because it allows people to create extension, create different plugins, and so my favorite IDE is still Microsoft Visual Studio Code.
And as a developer and engineer, coder, what does a good productive day look like for you? You get up, you have coffee, do you go straight to coding? Are you a night owl or are you an early riser? What does a productive day look like for you?
I'm definitely a night owl. Primarily it's because the time that I'm dealing with is mostly on the US region and I'm based in Europe. So my productive day usually looks like I wake up and if there's no meeting for that day, I will be very happy because like I can get straight into the coding and coding for like straight few hours without anyone disturbing me. But again, it's not to say meetings they are not productive, because usually when you have like several meetings, especially with user meetings, those are the meetings that I'm really looking forward to, because I get to talk to the users that have been using Flowwise and get their opinions, and from there we can know what are the items that are that we're missing and what we have to improve. I would say productive day usually depending on the mood that I have on that day. Like that day, if I wake up, I feel like coding. And if there's no meeting for that day, that would go straight into the coding, get up a coffee, coding, lunch, coding.
And you keep doing that till late at night?
Usually, yes, because that's when it's most, all the surroundings are very silent and you get to focus, putting in a headphone and, just get started. Yeah.
In terms of if you were to build a brand new application today, and let's say you're using, of course, some sort of Copilot, what is your tech stack of choice, including the database? I know you use Node and JavaScript, but if you were to do it all over, or somebody who's starting from fresh, like a full stack app, what would you suggest?
The usual stack that I'm most familiar with, I maybe might not be the best position to say this, but I am most familiar with the MERN stack. So initially I was using MERN as in MongoDB, Express, and R stand for React, and N stand for Node.js. But over the time, I've switched myself towards more databases. Instead of using NoSQL, I've been trying to use MySQL, this kind of a PostgreSQL as well. Like I find it much more, because a lot of the data that, especially for Flowise, are structured data, and it makes sense to use structured databases as compared to NoSQL databases.
That's very interesting. Now, in terms of a generative AI app, does that change your decision about choosing a database?
In terms of database, like if you were to create a generative AI applications, first thing to look for databases, I believe all developers will look at the cost. Then they will look at if the databases is built to be AI native, right? If they have the, all the AI functionality there, they can do, a good vectorizing operations. They have different mechanisms and supporting tools that allows them to really build a full-fledged applications. So I think that's what developers, at least for me, will try to look out for.
How can people get in touch with you?
You can join the Discord, or you can email me at Heng@FlowiseAI.com. So I am usually online on Discord or Slack, email. So
very good. Well, thanks so much, Henry, for joining us in this episode. Really appreciate your insights, and I'm looking forward to where Flowwise goes in the next few weeks and months as I keep following it. Thanks very much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.